Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Chancellor of Cheerfulness, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and of course, as you all know, your existential Mr. Rogers. Still don't quite know what that means, but that's what John Campea called me. Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Robcasting at you on this Friday, Robcasting from the Robservatory. This is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations episode number 453. I have to say, I worked this morning on the as yet unannounced show that I've been working on for the last, almost a year now. It's been unannounced. Hopefully it will be announced shortly or soon or sometime this summer. Who knows? But we're on the downside of season 2. Hasn't even been announced. But wow, what a barn burner of an episode this one was. So a lot of fun to work on. Very happy to work with the people I'm working for. I'm actually learning a lot. Never worked on something like this before. And I can't tell you what it is. So there's some vague YouTubing coming at you now. So anyway, every day I wake up on the show and I think, this day, I'm not going to have anything to talk about. There's going to be nothing. I look at movie news. I'm not going to talk about, Tenet pushed its release date again. Big surprise. You knew that was coming. I mean, I was even asking people to say, when are they going to announce Tenet was moved, and what is the new date? Well, it was kind of, they tricked us because the new date's a Wednesday. It's now August 12th instead of August 14th or whatever. Maybe. We'll see. Because the way we Americans are really handling our pandemic, I don't think any movies are going to open until 2021. Who knows? Perhaps I'll be wrong. I would really like to see that change because movie theaters cannot survive. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about, now let me just stay for the record right now. Let me just state it, like flat out. I'm the Chancellor of Cheerfulness. I am not here to suddenly get political on your ass. I don't want to do that, even though this is an inherently political topic. But I am a staunch believer in no censorship, in freedom of speech, all of those things. I've often joked on this show over the last year and a half that one day someone's going to get their hands on my Amazon purchase list over the last 10 years, and they're going to come after me for my taste. It doesn't matter what it is, but certain books I've read, certainly movies that I've purchased, all of those things. I mean, how long until a lot of the things that I love and that you love fall out of favor for whatever reason? Who knows? But anyway, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that because of something specific that I read this morning. But before I jump into that, there is an article that I found, again, on Medium, and it's by Megan Daum. And it was written on January 8th. And let's share it together, shall we? Again, Medium, January 8th, Megan Daum. Cancel culture makes everything look worse than it is. Cancel culture is the left's version of broken windows policing. The end of 2019 saw several conflicting reports about the severity and even legitimacy of cancel culture. It's bad. It's not that bad. It's real. It isn't that real. Imposed largely by social media-based arbiters of up-to-the-minute standards of justice, cancellation in this context refers to social and cultural excommunication imposed on people who've committed anything from actual criminal acts, like Harvey Weinstein committing sexual assault, to offenses so minor as to be imperceptible to any but the hungriest scavengers of online shame. Like the Iowa man whose efforts to raise money for charity resulted in brief viral fame that led to the surfacing of offensive tweets dating back to his adolescence. For all of the unpleasantness of such predicaments, some argue the threat is overblown. After all, Louis C.K., disgraced in 2017, is currently on a world tour. Kevin Hart, who stepped down from hosting the Oscars last year amid an uproar over years-old homophobic tweets, has a new Netflix series. J.K. Rowling, who in recent weeks, pardon me, did I say January? This is from January. Oh, it is. J.K. Rowling, who in recent weeks has been labeled a TERF, that stands for trans-exclusive radical feminist, for tweeting in support of yet another person deemed to be a TERF, it's a long story, to become something of a free speech hero for refusing to apologize. Still, it's worth pointing out that whether or not the canceled person manages to make a comeback, there can be consequences that go far beyond punishing the original sinner. When ABC axed Roseanne Barr's television show over a racist tweet, countless people, from actors and writers to makeup artists and lighting grips and catering staff, lost their jobs. When Al Franken was booted from the Senate over a tasteless photo and, dubious in my opinion, harassment complaint, the Democrats lost a powerful voice in Congress. The fact that it was the Democrats themselves who called for Franken's dismissal illustrates the great irony of cancellation. You can really only be canceled by your own side. Granted, there have been cases of ideological opponents laying the trap for someone's downfall, such as when right-wing troll come political commentator Mike Cernovich unearthed old tweets by Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn and got Gunn fired by Disney in 2017. Franken's accuser, for what it's worth, is a conservative radio host. But true punishment can only be meted out by members of one's own tribe. Maybe that's why liberals are so much more likely to cancel and be canceled than conservatives. On the right, cancellation is often enacted as a last resort. It's the nuclear option, the lever to be pulled only when the entire empire is threatened. For instance, when Milo Yiannopoulos is caught talking about pedestry or some mythical calculus finally determines that Roger Ailes' history of sexual predation is more trouble for Fox News than it's worth. The left, on the other hand, issues citations and frequently makes full-on arrests to anyone who shows any signs of disrupting a narrowly defined peace. You might even say the left takes broken windows approach to patrolling itself, a broken windows approach. Broken windows is the criminology theory that seeks to reduce major crime by cracking down hard on minor infractions like vandalism and loitering. It has been a guiding principle of urban policing since the 1980s and is often cited in the 2014 death of Eric Garner, who was choked to death while being arrested for selling loose cigarettes on a sidewalk. As Bench Ansfield, author of the forthcoming book about broken windows policing, explained in a December 27th Washington Post article, the researchers who first presented the theory distilled it into this core concept. If a window in a building is broken and is left unrepaired, all of the rest of the windows will soon be broken. If that doesn't sum up the driving force of cancel culture in all of its paranoid, myopic, misguided logic, if someone says something mildly offensive and is not swiftly punished, the whole world will be offensive, I don't know what does. Here's something we do know. Broken windows policing never really worked. As New York City mayor in the 1990s, Rudy Giuliani implemented the broken windows approach with a zero-tolerance policy for things like subway fare evasion and public drunkenness, and was credited with drastically bringing down the crime rate. But later research has suggested that the decrease in crime during that time correlated with a nationwide reduction, including in cities where broken windows policing was not in place. There's even good evidence that the approach might have done more harm than good. By focusing on low-level offenses, Ansfield wrote, the theory of policing works to criminalize communities of color and expand mass incarceration without making people safer. I realize that comparing mass incarceration to social media cancellation is asking to be canceled, but not that Twitter cares. That's not the connection I'm making. What I'm talking about is how easy it is to fall into the assumption that a few bad things mean everything is terrible. It's especially easy nowadays because social media rewards language that is not just hyperbolic, but apocalyptic. Climate change is not just a threat that demands serious attention, but an imminent catastrophe that will end the world as we know it in little more than a decade. The violent deaths of a trans person is not merely tragic, but proof of an epidemic of murder in that community. The Human Rights Council says that there were 26 such deaths reported in 2018. That's 26 too many, but the frequent use of epidemic around the issue might warrant some examination, not to mention contextualization within broader conversations about violence against women, 1,600 of whom were killed that year. The logic that animates both cancel culture and broken windows is fundamentally shallow, and also fundamentally fear-based. It acts on the assumption that something that's not necessarily harmful in and of itself, but that somehow has the flavor of harmfulness, be it an edgy tweet or some tipsy neighbors hanging out on a stoop, must be rooted out for the good of society. Unintended consequences be damned. Just as one unrepaired window will lead to nothing but broken windows, one problematic remark that goes unpunished will lead to an irreparably problematic world. As sad as it is to lose J.K. Rowling, taking her down is taking one for the team. It is on this twisted premise that left-wing purity police enact their own special form of brutality. Up until fairly recently, I wondered if our best hope for stamping out cancel culture would be getting canceled to actually become cool. With so many noteworthy people getting caught in the net of social media shaming, often for reasons you'd need a microscope to detect, it stands to reason that the general public would want to get in on it. From there, the act of canceling would become boring and banal. It would become basic, the pumpkin spice latte of ruining someone's life. It would be the late 2010s version of dancing the electric slide at a wedding. One minute, you're thinking you'll never escape it. The next minute, you realize you haven't thought about it in years. After all, pendulums are made to swing. In the last 4 years, under Mayor Bill de Blasio, New York City rolled back not only broken windows policing, but also related anti-crime strategy stop and frisk. With that has come waves of advocacy around decriminalization of everything from pot smoking to prostitution. So despite Giuliani being installed in Washington as Trump's chief whisperer, New York City is about as far from the Giuliani days as you can imagine, and no more dangerous for it, by most measures. Nonetheless, cancel culture might prove a far more formidable battleground than urban crime. If the by now entirely thinkable happens and Trump seizes another 4 years in power, there will be that much more anger out there for people to misplace and misuse through cancellation or worse. The left will have to contend with the fact that no amount of individual window repair can fix what feels like a broken world. The right, meanwhile, will insist there's nothing to fix. And if we cancel J.K. Rowling, it really may be the apocalypse. So, I found that article today. I thought it was interesting. As somebody who's obviously in recent weeks been embroiled in all of this, I thought, I can relate to this. Interesting. But why was I looking for this article in the first place? Well, it's because of an article that I read today. This was published on June 25th, and it's by Sarah Grachowski, and it was in Publishers Weekly. And, I like Publishers Weekly. I keep up on my books. So here's the article. Upcoming YA novel Ember Days canceled by the author. And the author is Alexandra Duncan. Has canceled her young adult novel Ember Days mere days after its cover reveal on Bookpage. By the way, here is the cover reveal in question. Here's the cover reveal for her book, Ember Days. So there you go. Take a look at that. That's the cover reveal. Mere days after its cover reveal on Bookpage, an hour after Duncan posted the cover reveal for the book, which was slated for a March 2021 release from Green Willow Books, an imprint of HarperCollins, to her Twitter feed, author Bethany C. Morrow questioned the representation within the novel, which was noted in the book's description. Naomi is the granddaughter of a powerful Gula conjure woman sent to Charleston to combat an evil force circling the city and hiding in plain sight as Deirdre's protege. Morrow said, via tweet, "I'm immediately concerned about an apparently white author not only writing a Gula character, a very underrepresented and erased people group, but then writing about a conjure woman and how what he or she is hiding in plain sight." Duncan immediately acknowledged Morrow's concern, responding, "I definitely struggled with whether it was okay for me to write about a culture outside of my own, and especially about the difficult topic of passing, which Naomi does for part of the book while going undercover in an all-white magical society." Further explaining that her decision to write from the perspective of a character with Gula Geechee heritage stemmed from an interest in writing about folk magic traditions from her area of the South. In a statement released yesterday by Duncan, she refers to exchanges with author colleagues following the cover reveal, which made her aware that in her misguided attempt to write a book that was inclusive of all cultures of Charleston and the Low Country where the book is set, she participated in the ongoing erasure of the Gula Geechee culture, explaining that her own limited worldview as a white person led to her incorrectly assume she could responsibly depict this culture. Duncan said, "Clearly, the fact that I did not see signs of the problem with my book's premise in my research or conversations about the book is evidence that I was not the right person to try and tell this story. I am deeply ashamed to have made a mistake of this magnitude and hope my actions will not negatively affect the cause of bringing greater diversity to children's literature." Duncan also addressed and rejected the misconception that the cancellation is censorship, noting, "It is wholly my decision to withdraw the book in order to mitigate the harm I have done. I have work to do to improve myself and my writing, and I will continue doing it." She concluded the statement by suggesting that readers support black authors and providing a list of suggested published or upcoming YA, all of which contain elements of fantasy and folklore. In response to Publishers Weekly request for a comment, Green Willow Publishing said, "We support Alexandra Duncan's decision to withdraw her manuscript and not go forward with the publication of her novel, Ember Days. We look forward to working with her on new projects in the future." So I read this article. One, it made me infuriated. But two, I didn't know anything about any of these people. As you know, I love my books. I'm surrounded by thousands of them. But I'm admittedly not up on my YA fiction. I don't know Alexandra Duncan, and I certainly don't know Bethany C. Morrow. But it made me curious. And you know what the first thing that made me curious about this article? The first thing I wanted to find out about? Well, here's what Morrow said. Here's what Bethany Morrow said. And by the way, just to get into this, here's Bethany Morrow, and here is Alexandra Duncan. Okay? Now, again, I don't know either woman, but what Bethany Morrow tweeted about this, she said, "I'm immediately concerned about an apparently white author not only writing a Gula character, a very underrepresented and erased people group, but then writing about a conjure woman and how and what she is hiding in plain sight." So, okay, here's the first thing that I thought when I read this tweet. I'll get back to her saying apparently white author in a minute. I'd never heard of Gula culture before. I didn't know what it is. And because I didn't know what it is, I thought to myself, I am going to find out. So I went to, up to the top of my browser, which is at the time being, and what I'm using now, Google Chrome. And I typed in Gula, Gullah. And what pops up? A Wikipedia page. And what does the Wikipedia page say? This article is about the Gula people and their culture and diaspora. The Gula are African Americans who live in the Low Country region of the U.S. states of Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina, in both the coastal plain and the Sea Islands. They developed a Creole language, the Gula language, and a culture rich in African influences that makes them distinctive among African Americans. Historically, the Gula region extended from the Cape Fear area on North Carolina's coast south to the vicinity of Jacksonville on Florida's coast. Today, the Gula area is confined to the Georgia and South Carolina Low Country. The Gula people and their language are also called Geechee, which may be derived from the name of the Ogeechee River near Savannah, Georgia. Gula is a term that was originally used to designate the Creole dialect of English spoken by Gula and Geechee people. Over time, its speakers have used this term to formally refer to their Creole language and distinctive ethnic identity as a people. The Georgia communities are distinguished by identifying as either freshwater Geechee or saltwater Geechee, depending on whether they live on the mainland or the sea islands. Because of a period of relative isolation from whites while working on large plantations in rural areas, the Africans, enslaved from a variety of Central and West African ethnic groups, developed a Creole culture that has preserved much of their African linguistic and cultural heritage from various peoples. In addition, they absorbed new influences from the region. The Gula people speak an English-based Creole language containing many African loanwords and influenced by African languages in grammar and sentence structure. Sometimes referred to as Sea Island Creole by linguists and scholars, the Gula language is especially related to and almost identical to the Bahamas, Bahamian Creole. There are also ties to Barbadian Creole, Guyanese Creole, Belizean Creole, Jamaican Patois, and the Creole language of West Africa. Gula crafts, farming and fishing traditions, folk beliefs, music, rice-based cuisine, and storytelling traditions all exhibit strong influences from Central and Western African cultures. Never heard of it before. Didn't know. But because I read this Publishers Weekly article, now I do. Sounds very interesting to me. What an interesting, fascinating culture. And a mix of different African cultures and also the Creole cultures that developed, of course, around places like Louisiana, Florida, that kind of thing. It made me, that's an interesting milieu. And then I decided, okay, well, I don't know anything about these two women. I don't know anything about them at all. So the first place that I went to Bethany Morrow's website. Now, this is Bethany. I went to her website. And on the top of her website, you can go. It's bethanycmorrow.com. Bio on top, books, writing, press, services, contact. And on the front of her website, it says, a captivating fantasy for today's readers. Bethany C. Morrow's debut YA novel, A Song Below Water, is about two sister friends discovering their magical identities against the challenges of misogynoir. And I'm like, okay, so I went up and looked at her books, right? And the first book that she has is called Mem, or M-E-M, Mem. And here's what it's about. Mem is a rare novel. This is her debut novel. A small book carrying very big ideas. The kind of story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it. Set in the glittering Art Deco world of a century ago, Mem makes one slight alteration to history. A scientist in Montreal discovers a method of allowing people to have their memories extracted from their minds, whole and complete. The mems exist as mirror images of their source, zombie-like creatures destined to experience that single memory over and over until they expire in the cavernous vault where they're kept. And then there is Dolores Extract 1, the first mem capable of creating her own memories. An ageless beauty shrouded in mystery, she is allowed to live on her own and create her own existence until one day she is summoned back to the vault. What happens next is a gorgeously rendered, heartbreaking novel in the vein of Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. Debut novelist Bethany Morrow has created an allegory for our own time, exploring profound questions of ownership and how they relate to identity, memory, and history, all in the shadow of Montreal's now-forgotten slave trade. Okay, I read that. I'm like, man, I'm in. This book sounds great. I totally want to read her book. So I'm like, all right, how awesome. Right? Good for her. So then I decided to jump on over to Alexandra Duncan's website and see what she has cooking over there. So first of all, here's Alexandra. Yeah. And here's her website. Science fiction, fantasy, and feminism. And then she has a section on her website called A Better World. And here's what she has on that section. One person alone can't save the world, but we can all break off a tiny piece of the problem. Check out the links below to find your own way to make the world a better place. And then if you go here, she has a place where you can donate to Averting Maternal Death and Disability, Allies in Youth Development, Books for Africa, Ashoka, Behind the Beautiful Forevers, Life, Death, and Hope in Mumbai. Other women's works, Cinderella Ate My Daughter, Millions of Hearts for Haiti, Save Our Sisters and Serve. I don't even know what all these are. The Dark Girls documentary, Rise Women Rise, We Need Diverse Books, Girls and Sex, Navigating the Complicated New Landscape, Kiva, The List Project, Project to Resettle Iraqi Allies, Nerd Fighters, Take Back the Night, It Gets Better, Half the Sky, I Am Malala, Julia Alvarez, Once Upon a Quinceañera. I never get that word right. Redefining Girly, Fighting Stereotypes and Sexualizing of Girlhood from Birth to Teens, Three Little Words, To Be a Friend is Fatal. Anyway, this is already all on her website. So, it got me, as I'm reading all of this, a cursory glance at her website, which, I mean, I made after reading this article. It was very apparent that here is Alexandra is a female writer who clearly has certain causes for women all around the planet, many different shades of women in there, and a lot of female causes of many different things. Now, and then obviously her part of the world, she's also from, she lives in North Carolina now, but she's from that area. So she says that the people that she was interested in, the Gula people, clearly that interest was derived from where she grew up, part of the United States that she's from. Just like Bethany's mem book is about Montreal 100 years ago. So both women are writing fiction, fantasy fiction, science fiction, from the perspective of their region, where they're from. Now, after finding out about the Gula people, which I didn't know about, I'm from Seattle and I've only lived on the West Coast. I was in South Carolina for one summer. I spent an entire summer there, and I went from Greenville to Myrtle Beach and traveled across the state. It was very interesting, but I did not learn about these people. But what I found interesting about this was, according to the Publishers Weekly article, if you go back there, Morrow said upon the reveal of this book, she said, I'm immediately concerned about an apparently white author not only writing a Gula character, a very underrepresented and erased people group, but then writing about a conjure woman and how what he or she is, how what she is hiding in plain sight. So, and when she said apparently white author, that led me to believe that she didn't even do a cursory Google search about Alexandra Duncan. As a matter of fact, that led me to believe she knows nothing about Alexandra Duncan and immediately became, I guess, suspect of this woman's work without finding out anything about her. I mean, when I read this Publishers Weekly article, I've done more research about both of these women than apparently Miss Morrow did about the woman that she's now questioning her, I guess, ethics, and she's put her on notice publicly. She said, absolutely, I'm immediately concerned about an apparently white author not only writing a Gula character. I mean, I don't even know. What I don't understand is, here are two women, after a cursory examination of both of their websites. They're probably very much allies, and they probably very much support the same causes. They're both writing both YA fiction and fantasy. Bethany has written a book, her first novel, Mem, seems something like that would be right up my alley, and I would want to read it. And Alexandra Duncan's new book that she has coming out, Ember Days, which is now not coming out because she decided to cancel it based on what I would say, this Bethany Morrow put her on notice. Make no mistake. Put her on notice. I'm immediately concerned about an apparently white author. Why? Why is she concerned about that? Why is she concerned about anybody writing something at all? Shouldn't you, as female YA authors, have some kind of, I don't know, be in the same club that you're both writing these kinds of books? Hopefully both, according to Alexander's website, aren't you both on the same team? Like, aren't you both? And what's really interesting is both of these women have written books that I want to read. Certainly, Bethany's debut science fiction novel, Mem, sounded really interesting, especially when it's compared to Never Let Me Go, which, by the way, I want to point out, we're talking about tonight, the movie Never Let Me Go. We're talking about it on Whining About Movies tonight, Elizabeth and I. And I had never heard of Bethany Morrow before, but she's written a book that I want to read. But after reading about this little brouhaha, I'm like, maybe she doesn't want me to read her book. I'm a middle-aged, white, cis male. Is there anything in her book that's for me? I would like, well, the story alone was something I was interested in. But now, Alexandra Duncan, and maybe she knows Gula people. Maybe she grew up with them. Maybe her best friend was one. Maybe her entire book was informed by her own life, growing up in the South. Who knows? You know, when James Patterson writes the character of Alex Cross, who's black, I've never heard anyone say, should James Patterson be writing the Alex Cross character? I've read all those books. You know, I've never thought to myself, you know, James Patterson's a white dude. What does he know about a black forensic psychiatrist? Doctor. What does any author know about anything? Authors are making shit up from whole cloth. Frank Herbert had never been to Arrakis. You know, Isaac Asimov he'd never been to Trantor. Anne McCaffrey never rode a dragon, and she'd never been to Pern. Yet she wrote a whole series, The Dragon Riders of Pern. I mean, the saga of Pliocene Exile. I do not, when I'm reading this, I read this and I'm like, this one woman, Bethany, has made basically a tacit threat. I know, oh, she's just asking a question. No. She went out on social media and put a fellow author that is clearly an ally based on a cursory example of her own website, or a cursory examination of her own website, and went after her and says, I'm immediately concerned. Are you really concerned, though? Are you really concerned that I, as a white dude from the West Coast, I had never heard about the Gula people, and just reading this article in Publishers Weekly made me go and do a Wikipedia search and learn about the Gula people, which is something I'd never heard of. I never would have heard of it unless Alexandra Duncan had written this book that she is now canceled, until you brought it up and made it a thing. She canceled her book. Am I supposed to understand that people now can only write or act or think? I mean, authors and storytellers, their job is to try and make sense of human experience. The idea that you can and can't write about certain things, I think certainly most of the science fiction and horror that I have read under this kind of logic means it all goes away. Unless Clive Barker knows Cenobites, he never would write that Hellbound Heart. You know, did Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I mean, did he know Sherlock Holmes? Was he a detective? It boggles my mind that a woman like Bethany, who, by the way, has had an incredible education. She's a very well-educated woman. She's studied in Europe. She's done a lot of different things in college. She's a very well-educated woman. And yet she comes out and she says, I'm immediately concerned. Of all the concerns that she has in her own life, you know, she looks at the cover of a book and gives a cursory glance to what the book's about, doesn't even take the time to find out whether the author is white or not, apparently white. I mean, the question is, why was she so quick to be angry about another woman's work? You know, I know she lives in Montreal now, but she didn't live in Montreal 100 years ago, nor does she know a creature like a mem. She made it up. And yet, for all we know, Alexandra Duncan grew up with somebody who's Gula. Or maybe their parents were, or something. And yet, she just went after her on Twitter. Didn't stop and go to her website, apparently. Cursory glance. I did I went to her website. I went to both of their websites. I even read an article, which I actually pulled up. She wrote an article, Bethany did, called "The Double Blind: Writing Historical Fiction as a Black Woman," and she wrote an article about it. And I'm going to give you the article to read. I'm going to put it in the live chat and let you guys read it. Tell me what you think, guys, girls, gentle beings, whoever you are. Now, here's what I don't get, and I've said this a lot. When people read or experience a story, you know, if the story is good, if it's true to itself, if it moves you, or like, for instance, Never Let Me Go is a movie I dearly, dearly love. We're going to talk about it tonight. It's about a certain kind of people that don't exist. They're unreal. They were imagined. But within the context of the way they were imagined, I believed them. So if Alexandra Duncan's book, and by the way, what is a story? I've said this a million times on this show. Stories, the whole point of a story is to try and convey basic human truths that cross boundaries, because we're all human beings that live on this planet. So there are all human truths that we all can share. We all have to breathe air, clean air. We all want to eat good food. We all like to have, hopefully, parents. We all want to have good relationships with one another. We want to have significant others in our lives. There are commonalities between all peoples on this planet. And all great stories derive from those commonalities. Now, the details, the things that we don't share, make storytelling really interesting. Like, you know, I'm not a gumshoe. I never lived in the 40s. But reading stories about gumshoes in the 40s, I like that. Now, if it were the case that unless you were a gumshoe in the 40s, you can't write those stories, well, how many great stories would we have been deprived of? All storytelling is imagining. It's making shit up from whole cloth. Now, the best storytellers make us believe. And when an author or a filmmaker is, say, telling a story that's outside of their experience of life, that's why you do research. And you try and create something that's believable to the reader. But a woman like Bethany, I don't understand why she wants to go after a fellow author about representation, and why is she immediately concerned about an apparent white author going after a story? I mean, I went to her website and she's writing a book of her idea, the idea that a memory can be extracted and given physical form. That alone has me locked into her book. I want to read her book. That concept alone gets me. What an intriguing concept that is. I've never seen that before. I've never really heard that before. It made me really intrigued, and it takes place at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. I'm in. I'm going to go order Bethany's book. I'm not going to sit there and go, well, Bethany, you've offended me. No, I want to find out what she's all about. Maybe I'll understand her more by reading her work. I certainly understand her more by reading her essay. But the thing is, why? Now, what's happened is, so Bethany goes out and makes what is, let's face it, perhaps not a direct threat, but it's not like Bethany contacted Alexandra privately. She went out on Twitter, in a public forum for all to see. There's a reason why she did that. And the question I would ask is why? Why? You know, as a fellow writer, a fellow woman, hopefully an ally, that sounds funny to say fellow woman, you both would be supportive of your YA fiction. You know, what if her book's really good? I don't know. I'm never going to know, because apparently it's never going to come out now. And how long might she have been writing that book? What if it's something she's wanted to write her whole life? And then she did. And now it's not coming out. What if 5 years from now, what if a girl that was supposed to read that book, and maybe she decides to, I don't know, become an activist for the Gula people, brings their culture into a place it isn't before. You never know what's going to happen. The suppression of those kinds of ideas. Now, I know that the good, you have to take the good with the bad. If there are bad ideas, you have to let those exist too, because I believe that the good ideas will win out. It's just like the reason I like Clockwork Orange, because what is the message of a Clockwork Orange? That the ability for human beings to choose, to have free will, even if they choose to do bad, is more important than if people's behavior is conditioned so they can only function one way, then they have their humanity torn away from them. And I feel that there is a danger here. We're seeing it all around us, especially lately, that in everyone's desire to become an ally or to become sympathetic to all different kinds of peoples, if someone's not doing it the right way or the proper way, or you take one thing someone said and you're like, that's your defining characteristic, let's burn you at the stake. One, Alexander Duncan's book is gone. That story is interesting. I've never even read a book that is about those people. Didn't even know they existed until I read this Publishers Weekly article about them. So I guess in a way, even this controversy has brought light to something I wouldn't have known about. So that's a pretty good thing. But at the end of the day, what we're losing is a story. And that story might be a very good story. And the question that I have to ask myself is why? Why have we lost this story? What was the point of it? What was the point of one author going after a fellow author about a book that hasn't even been published yet? We don't even get to hear the idea first, because it's gone. I don't want to live in this world with that happening. You know, I don't want to see two people that could be the best of friends. You know, they go to a book fair, they go to a convention, they could be sitting next to each other. They might be great friends. You never know. They might have some of the same causes that they both support. Alexander Duncan has causes on her website. Here's a bunch of links for things that I support that are probably things that Bethany supports too. But now, Alexandra, she's married and has 3 cats. She's scrambling who knows how long. Who knows? Maybe her husband and her were counting on the revenue from this book for something that they were going to do that now they're not going to get to do. And for what? For what reason? We need to do better. You know, if we want to have people that are allies and we want to have people that support our causes, we can't be going after one another. Especially when you have fellow artists, fellow writers, people that have taken months, if not years, or even decades to write their material. Let something let it see the light of day and then give it its day in court. If you don't like the book, then write an essay about it. You know, but to call somebody out publicly, to call a fellow writer out publicly to the point where they feel that they have to pull their book from release, not good. We have to be ever vigilant because, you know, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think it's tough. All I know is that there's one less story in the world that could have inspired people, that could have... Now, I don't even know if it's good or not. But I'll tell you one thing, she does have a publisher. She has published other books. And now we're not going to get this new one. Maybe she has a cadre of fans that want to read it. But because Bethany Morrow, with one tweet, caused a book to not get published. Something to think about. I don't have an answer. But I'll tell you one thing, it pisses me off. It bothers me. It bothers me because as someone like myself, you know, you're one step away from anybody. Anybody can say whatever they want on Twitter. What if someone said that they didn't like, I don't know, the movies I was involved with? I could be spending 4 years on a movie. Somebody says one thing on Twitter. Oh, the pending sale I might have for my work or the hundreds of people that worked on this film, it could all go away. I don't know. Anyway, just something I was thinking about today. I I guess I'm glad I'm not a woman trying to get my YA fiction published, because to know that my fellow female authors out there they don't have my back is a little disconcerting. They would much rather, you know, I don't know what. We'll see. Anyway, well, anyway, I think I got letters, people. I got a lot of letters. I got a lot of letters to read, and I'm going to read them. So here we go. The first, I've got a couple of letters from Jeffrey Mao, but I'll get there. This first letter, ladies and gentlemen, is from Just a Brown Girl. I've come to love Just a Brown Girl. She's been sending me letters. Just a Brown Girl is a filmmaker, and I really appreciate hearing the status report of her projects. Just a Brown Girl log. Stardate 05/16/2020. Hi, Rob. Happy Throwback Thursday. I thought I would share a little bit more about the COVID-19 project. Remember, several weeks ago, you encouraged folks to start something creative and share. So here I go. Last year, 3 things happened in fairly close succession. Game of Thrones broke my heart. I came late to the show between seasons 5 and 6, and I completely fell in love. It wouldn't be until later that I recognized that part of my immediate adoration for the show was because of the ways the show reminded me of my favorite childhood YA tetralogy. More on that in a minute. Anyway, I fell in love just as the show, in my opinion, began to slowly fall to bits. Then, last year, we saw the finale of 2 pop culture juggernauts, Game of Thrones and Avengers Endgame. I know it's controversial, but I believe the Game of Thrones fan base was generally disappointed, while the Marvel fan base was generally more than satisfied. That was true for me anyway, and I always attributed Marvel's success to the fan in the room. Game of Thrones didn't have a steward for the beloved franchise. They didn't have a Kevin Feige. For me, it was never a question whether Endgame would stick the landing, and my heart goes out to George R.R. Martin's book readers. We just all found out too late that his novels didn't have a fan in the room when it came to making the television series. Well, at least not when it came to concluding that series. So that's one. D23 last year was not a good time for Tom Holland. He found out about the Marvel-Sony split at D23 on the heels of Uncharted losing its 6th director. I was pissed off about the rampant speculation that ensued. Sony will put him here. Marvel has to write Spider-Man out there. He'll be in Venom. He'll be in Morbius. He won't be able to reference the MCU, blah, blah, blah. As a director and a creative, I tend to champion actors. And I get now that that's what fandom does, particularly in this age. It speculates and prods and digs. There is this insatiable greed for answers, a sometimes unreasonable mission to be first and to be right, which I think is rooted in what I call toxic competitiveness, or in other words, American. And I hated how most of fandom talked about Holland like he was a piece of meat, like an object rather than a person with no choice in the matter. Kind of the way some people are talking about Robert Pattinson for a while there. But I thought to myself, this kid needs more options. That was 2. So I work in media, and I was doing research on the HALF Foundation. It's the foundation Ryan Murphy set up with his production company that has pledged to hire directors from underrepresented classes, people of color, women, LGBTQ, in at least half of their television projects. And I came across an interview of Mr. Murphy. He talked about how he started out in makeup and then began writing for television, but no one wanted to let him direct. And he said he basically had to threaten to sue before anyone would give him a shot. And he said, it takes a brave person to say, I want that. That was 3. That's when I hit critical mass. I got on the internet and looked up the name I'd looked up twice a year for decades. I found it on the simple web page as previous years. The email address was the same. So I did it. I finally emailed the author of the fantasy book series that I've been dying to adapt. I would explain in my letter that I would be the Kevin Feige for this series, the fan in the room, who would not forsake the characters and IP over the product that a studio would be paying for. I would profess I understood that I'm a little fish in a big pond, and I'm sure the film rights are already gone, but I've been thinking about this story for 2 decades. So, I just have to be brave and ask anyway. 4 days later, I got an email that began, "Dear Michelle, the Brave. You mentioned some weeks ago that you were thinking of starting a film project and that you might use Robservations to chronicle the entire process. I think I might steal your ideas. Actually, I already had that idea. The first of the year, I bought domain names and set up the YouTube channel and an Instagram account, but I haven't done much with any of it, to be honest. But it sounds like such a great idea when you pitched it. I guess I should just do it after all. But the gumption to start is always the hardest part. Thanks for reading the latest installment of Indie Filmmaker on the Road to a Studio Blockbuster Franchise, aka the COVID-19 Project. Just a Brown Girl. Log, stardate 6/25/2020. Hey Rob, so I wrote that letter quite a while ago. It's truly weird as I am ramping up to talk about something you pretty much paraphrase it 2 days before. Anyway, I got word Monday that I'm now a member of the Producers Guild of America. Yeah, me. I'm trying to accumulate some street cred for when I go looking for an agent or manager. It feels a little slimy, but my gut tells me I should capitalize on all the love America is showing to people of color right now. Getting in the room with the right person is key, so getting in the room at all will be by any means necessary. Thanks for dropping the knowledge on the lookbook. I knew about lookbooks, but you gave me a great reminder. Since absolutely no fan art exists for this fantasy series, I've been trying to find an artist or artists to do concept art, but I keep hitting a wall there. Everyone on Fiverr is too afraid of losing their perfect 5-star rating to believe me when I say I'm not looking for anything super specific, just draw what you see after reading this description. I found a couple of dozen Fivers within my budget, so I'm just going to cycle through them all till I find my guy or gal. Gonna sign off now. I have my mother living with me, so I can only tune in sporadically, but I will always keep coming back and checking in. You folks here in the Post-Geek Singularity are a hoot, and you always keep it positive, which is so important these days. P.S. For interested parties who weren't able to get the link last time, the name of my feature that I made is Better Half from 2017. You can find it on Amazon, Google Play, and iTunes. Apologies for the typos and run-ons of the lengthiness of this entry. Until the future, same Burnett time, same Burnett channel, I am just a brown girl. You know what, actually, you're not just a brown girl. You know what you are? You're just a brown girl, the brave. Thanks for writing again. I love your letters. Keep them coming, please. I beg of you. Mr. Tibbs is in here. Do they call you that? Mr. Tibbs says, 38 years since the opening of The Thing. Wow, I saw that movie the weekend at the drive-in, and the night my girlfriend helped me become a man, if you know what I mean. Not the ideal place. A 1970 Firebird offers limited mobility, but it worked out. Whenever I catch The Thing on TV, a big smile comes to my face. Wow, your girlfriend helped you become a man in a 1970 Firebird while you were watching The Thing at a drive-in. I would say, Mr. Tibbs, that that's winning at life. That's a memory I wish everyone had. Whether it worked out or not, you know, all these 38 years later, you can write this show and I can smile, a big grin, knowing that that, my friend, and you know who would have liked, you know who's going to like that the most? The Horror Master. He's on Twitter. You should tweet him that story. Perhaps I will, but you should. It's not my story to tell. But thank you for sharing it. David Lutz is here. Forgive me, Rob. I just missed it, but I sent a letter the day before the Whining Jaws episode. It specifically addressed how great the show is with Elizabeth and how much I enjoy being introduced to new movie experiences. It also described my relationship with Martha's Vineyard, the island where Jaws was shot at. I don't know if I read that one. Stay well and keep up the great work on both shows, David. I think I did. I'll have to go look. I'll find out, David. This one comes from Arnold Schwarzenegger, not the real Arnold Schwarzenegger. Dear Rob, I hope you and your family are well. I believe you've already seen the trailer for the Foundation adaptation. Have you read the books? Yes, I have. If so, how does it compare to how you perceive the Foundation world in the first place? And what is your view of the three gender-swapped male-to-female characters? Salvor Hardin, Gal Dornick, and Ito Demerzel. From what I heard, these characters are supposed to be significant. They are significant. So it's deeper than the Liet Kynes situation in Dune. I really don't understand why people have the need to change established characters. Why is it so difficult to keep the gender right in the first place? Sure, there are sometimes narrative purposes to alter aspects of the story to streamline a movie or show, but I don't think that justifies a gender change. They could have simply created new characters. Nevertheless, it appears to be an intriguing piece of the trailer. There appears to be a lot of similarities to the Dune miniseries in terms of the costumes and overall story. This should not be surprising, as I believe this was one of the influences of Dune. Aside from Foundation and Dune, what other popular science fictions are you aware of that have not yet been adapted for the big screen? Thanks, Rob, and I hope you have a great day. Well, Arnold, first of all, I got to tell you, I don't mind gender swapping. Look, I always go back to look at Battlestar Galactica. I remember, first of all, I never thought Battlestar Galactica was a sacred text. I watched it. I saw every episode when it first aired, and even I was like, a lot of this is pretty goofy. I mean, I liked it, but I thought Star Trek was head and shoulders above it. I always saw it as sort of a mediocre Star Wars ripoff, which is exactly, by the way, what it was. So when they were going to turn Starbuck into a woman, I didn't have a problem with it. As a matter of fact, I mean, Cara Thrace is a much better written character than Dirk Benedict's Starbuck ever was. So I don't mind gender swapping in this day and age. I mean, look, man, let's face it. Most science fiction, I say most science fiction, was pretty much written by older white dudes. I mean, they were young too at some point. And I think their experience of the world writing a lot of science fiction was limited. It got better. You know, you had more people come in, more female science. I mean, James Tiptree Jr. was not even a man. She was a woman who had a pen name because she couldn't get published as a woman. So I have no problem with characters that are gender swapped. I really don't, because, you know, first of all, a lot of these science fiction stories could use a little bit more flavor. And if you're writing the story, like Liet Kynes, a lot of people are like, how can you change, you know, Dr. Kynes into a woman? Well, okay, so you went from being Chani's father to being Chani's mother. I have no problem with that, especially with what happens later to women in the Dune universe. I mean, basically, they become the fighting force. You've already got the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, so I don't have a problem. I thought the Foundation trailer looked really, really good. I'm excited for it. But yeah, I think, you know, when you're dealing with far-flung future societies, you know, it's better that your clothes sort of have a timeless quality to them. But I think it looks really good. I mean, we'll see. I'm curious, is it just going to be the first 3 Foundation books? Or, of course, later, Asimov wrote a lot more. But the original Foundation, is it Foundation and Empire? Is that the next one? But I'm in. Looks good to me. And as far as science fiction novels that I would love to see adapted for the big screen, oh my God, take your pick. So many. I really want to see Hyperion, the Hyperion Cantos. Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos, I think, would be great. I would love to adapt those books. Brian Eng is here. Brian Eng says, hey, Rob, the mechanic at my local Firestone told me to have a better day. I wanted to ask him if he's part of the Post-Geek Singularity, but I chickened out. So, Chris, in Cleveland, if you're out there, you have a better day, too. Every time I see your name, Brian, I'm like, uh-oh, what moral quandary is he going to throw my way this time? But I think that's very, very funny. That's good. I'd like to say I coined that phrase. I've been using it for a long time. This one comes from Herr Weber. How do to the supreme sommelier of cinema, Dateline, click, 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 summer of 1982. I get it. That's a slide projector. Carriage returns, special effects. I would visit my grandparents in Ashland, Oregon in the 70s and 80s, and this is long before the recent popularity. The view from their living room was 2 entire full walls of windows facing directly toward the Siskiyou Mountains. As a kid, I would sit in this room drawing images from Marvel, DC, and then the popular Gnomes, Fairies illustrated books, staring into the vista, sharpening my imagination. We would jam out on my boombox, yes, the kind with 8D batteries, to AC, DC, and I did get the proverbial, "this is too loud," from my grandfather. My cousin, along with myself, would draw gnomes, trolls, fairies, demons, spacemen, and other images from the metal rock we would listen to while hanging. As part of the Geek Singularity, I was up to date about Blade Runner and Starlog, and I was very aware of its release. So, on the release date, for the record, I was 14, I had to see this flick. I couldn't use the grandparents' car to trot along down to the local town, so I walked down the mountain under the freeway by the tumbleweeds into town. It was warm, but not hot, about 3 miles one way. I arrived, again 14, at the small town movie theater. Can't remember if it was a 1 or 2 screener. Though an old movie house, I can't recall. You know, I'm old-ish. I walked right up to the box office and verbally gave my order, 1 ticket to Blade Runner. And I was gained entrance. Holy fuck yeah! I don't recall being aware that I might not be able to get into the movie. I just walked down the mountain and went to the screening. Back then, geeks went to everything, or pleaded. Popcorn, Twizzlers, soda, no effing West Coast red vines. Dude, I'm sorry. Let's get this straight. Red vines are way better than Twizzlers. Way better. They always have been. They always will be. And I'm talking, this is not even up for debate. But anyway, there is an invisible battle here and a story to unlock, sir. I hand that over to you. Twizzlers always beat the choice of red vines. They do not. They do not. Yuck. I walked out that summer alone in the summer heat, and I began the trip back up my family to the mountain. But I stopped, and the only comic book shop in town, I did an old school walk through the long boxes, inhaling the paper printing ink telltale smell of a proper comic book shop. Intoxicating. If that could be sent, if that scent could be put in a car freshener, it would make billions, sir. I then, comics in hand, headed back up the mountain in Ashland. My mind was awash with what I had experienced. I spent approximately 3 miles walking, reliving and contemplating what I just ingested joyously. I never forgot that film experience or the brain fire of ideas from such a film. 2019 was so in the future and looked amazing. Postscript. Yes, a postscript. Wildly impactful. I must say, being at Sid Mead's house for a video interview that I was shooting, thoughts visually swirled, and after the shoot, and talking about Blade Runner, he said, "Do you want to see something?" I said, "Fuck yes, I do." In his bedroom, opposite of the bed, was the actual dresser, and the only thing displayed on the top was an actual screen-used model of the spinner. One of 3 spinner models ever used for the film. I just looked over to Sid and smiled. He returned it. Yes, Blade Runner, always. And now read on. Well, thank you for that letter, Herr Weber. I liked it very much, and you're absolutely right. James, as many people, since you brought up, I would like to point out that this book, the Cyberpunk Nexus, Exploring the Blade Runner Universe, is a book of essays and articles about the whole Blade Runner universe, from K.W. Jeter's books to the Marvel adaptation, to an essay I wrote called Awe, Wonder, and Disappointment. Blade Runner on the box office of the summer of 1982. And it's a pretty good book. I think it's a really good book. It's a thick book. This is the physical media copy, which I recommend. You can find it on Amazon. So check it out. So yeah. James Kevins writes in and says, "Greetings, Rob. Well, the time has come to address that burning topic that will not go away. I mean, of course, the question of interspecies hanky-panky. Any serious talk of pan-galactic slap and tickle must first and foremost take into account a certain amount of discretion. A Delton Lovelace stepping out of a sonic shower is one thing, while a Mother Horta is quite another. And of course, I freely admit I've never seen a green Orion dancing girl that couldn't have her way with me. By the way, I don't believe we've heard the ladies chime in on this. What's the female perspective on the question? Thanks for all you do. Peace and long life. Jim Kevins. Yeah, we got our resident troika. We got our three musketeers of Paula, Vesna, and Willow. They should weigh in. Would they be up for a little interspecies hanky-panky? If so, who would they go for? If they could, ride the baloney pony, as it were, but with a humanoid alien that might have all kinds of different appendages, would they do it? That is the question. That for those of you who haven't been to this show before, we've had an ongoing debate about whether or not we would have interspecies romances with aliens that aren't human. Could we go there? I have said there are many different aliens we've seen in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, or science fiction, that I could easily get it on with, but I would draw the line at, say, an alien xenomorph. I couldn't go there, no matter what she could do or where she could put her tail. I'm just saying I could celebrate a little International Women's Day, but not with a xenomorph. So what do you all think? It's an ongoing question. Jim Kevins wants to know. Let's hear from the ladies. Do they have an answer? Because I don't. Stephen Cross is here. Stephen Cross says, "Hi, Rob. Hope you're doing well. I have two questions for you. First, you mentioned your friend on Etsy that makes replica books. How do we search for his work? Second, do you think if Warner Brothers backed the Brinks truck up to Ben Affleck's store and gave it to him to play Batman on a Batman series for HBO Max, would he? DC has been having its characters on television and movies for a while. So while Matt Reeves can make the Batman, HBO could have its own Batman series. What do you think?" Well, first of all, I don't think Ben Affleck would do it. It depends how much money. Never say never. I mean, he probably could direct the pilot, but that's a lot of work for him. I mean, I know, but maybe he would. I mean, look, I think everybody was surprised by his portrayal of Batman. We all loved it. I loved it. I love my Ben Affleck hot toy. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I was ever going to buy a hot toy of Ben Affleck in something, I would have been like, no. But boy, do I dearly love my Ben Affleck hot toy. You know what? I didn't get the armored Batman figure, which I have to get on the secondary market. But one day I'm going to own it too. As for your first question, Swack Props, S''WAK, Swack Props, Cal's store, his Etsy store. He's amazing. He's been advertising. He's made another copy. He's made the Lucifer copy of the 9 Gates of the Kingdom of Heaven from the 9th Gate. I will always love that somebody who watched this show actually they make they have a side business making books from movies. His work is first rate. It's amazing. And his Grail Diary from Last Crusade is amazing. I mean, you got to check out his stuff. Swack Props. So check that out, Stephen. Thank you very much, by the way, for writing in. Let's see what you guys are saying over here. Who's here? And what are you guys saying? What is going on over here in the chat? I will go down and see because I don't know. Damo Davies is here. Sends in a tip. Greetings from the UK. Payday today after a month of working from home. Hope you're staying safe. Would you rather vent your problems to Counselor Troy or Guinan on the Enterprise D? I gotta say Guinan. I mean, Guinan, she's an Allurian. She's from a race of listeners. And I'll bet she has great stories. Not that Deanna Troy wouldn't have great stories, but I would take Guinan all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. So, absolutely. Damo goes on and says, is the fact that I have major issues with the writer, Wes Craven killing off Nancy Thompson in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors more my issue that I become attached to the character in a slasher movie, or the writers in killing her? Oh, that's your issue. I mean, look, we don't want our heroines to die, but Dream Warriors is one of the best Nightmare sequels. Maybe the best Nightmare sequel. I love Dream Warriors. I thought it was great. I'm sorry that Heather Langenkamp, had to bite the dust, but I think, look, in a slasher movie, you can never get attached to anyone, except maybe Jamie Lee Curtis. That's okay. Willow is here. Willow says, I actually thought that Elijah Wood and all the actors playing the hobbits and dwarfs were little people when I first watched Lord of the Rings. Have there been more movie tricks that really fooled you? Well, what Willow is referring to, we were talking about who can play in what movies. Do actors have to really be the people they are? And I think the general consensus is no, they don't, because there are no hobbits. But yeah, I mean, it was really convincing. I think there's a lot of movie tricks that have fooled me. I mean, as a kid growing up, but like that, I mean, I was always sort of hyper aware of movies, but I can't really think of one particular movie trick, just because I've been so interested in filmmaking since I was a little kid, so it was hard to trick me. So probably not that really fooled me, because I was always interested in how they did that. So yeah, I'd have to say no, Willow. I have to say no. I'm sorry I don't have one to say yes. Jordy Lyons is here, sends in a super chat and says, could we say a big thank you to Detective Jim Boyers and his wife Heidi and let him know he's missed? He shaped this community and I respected him greatly, and I need to say it. Look, I love Jim Boyers. I hope he comes back. Detective Jim, the community isn't the same without him. And that's not to take away from anybody else like you or the Richard or Haynock or Mike Bodden or Greg Smith. But I think we all love Detective Jim. I understand why he had to walk away. I hope he comes back. I miss Jim. I miss him terribly, actually. Bob Koal sends in a tip and says, 18 months ago, an Asian author's book was canceled under similar circumstances. Really? Well, yeah, this is just, I mean, this is really, I think, a really ugly part of what's going on now, is that suddenly, I mean, I guess it's because I read a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, but I can't stand this. I really think the idea that you make tacit threats to people that you're going to sick a mob on them by bringing it up on Twitter, I don't agree with that at all. I think that's cowardly, to be honest. Calvin Bowes sends in a tip and says, Braxton wants to know in City on the Edge of Forever why Kirk didn't just bring Edith Keeler back to his time. Then she wouldn't have to die and the future would be the same. Ooh, that's a good question. And you know what? Braxton's very smart. But the fact was that was a pivotal moment in history, and I think Edith Keeler's death also affected people. Remember, everyone whose lives that she touched were affected by her passing. So you never know, all of the bums that were in that mission that she would speak to every night, maybe her death affected one of them and they went on and became a captain of industry. You never know. It ripples out through time. So that's why they couldn't risk it. They couldn't risk it. Damo Davies sends in a tip and says, in my view, the most pitch-perfect Superman scene is the final scene of Smallville with a President-elect Lex Luthor engage Lois and Clark and the John Williams Superman theme as we finally see Clark turn into Superman on the roof of the Daily Planet. You might be right about that. It's a pretty great scene. I just thought it was too long in coming. Mr. Media Theory sent in a super chat and says, R&B, you should watch Brett Weinstein's Dark Horse channel. He has been through this and has been warning us. This is the woke religion we live in. Mr. Media Theory, I love Brett Weinstein because Brett Weinstein was at the center of the Evergreen controversy. I went to the Evergreen State College back in the 80s, and what happened at Evergreen in 2017, look, I think it's gross watching students go after their professors, talking about how offended they are and how hurt they are. I mean, if you've paid money to go to a college, if you've tried to get into a school, why are you trying to go there if not for the faculty? If not for the faculty. It's amazing when I see students disrespecting professors at schools and saying things like, I want to get you fired. I'm like, wow. Like, you applied to that school. And what happened at Evergreen, other things that we've seen at other Ivy League schools, at Harvard or Yale, watching students go after professors, I think it's really, it's the worst of our culture. Kids that think that their lives, that we need to hear exactly what we want to hear. Schools, colleges are places of intellectual debate and intellectual rigor. And for a kid to go after a professor and think that they know more or know better than the professor does, then why are you at that school? What do you think that school is supposed to be? And what happened to Brett Weinstein and what happened at Evergreen, it made me really sad, because Evergreen was a place that was deeply inspiring to me when I left high school. It was where I went to college first before I transferred to USC, and it was a wonderful place. And it never what happened at what happened at Evergreen to Brett Weinstein in 2017 never would have happened to Evergreen. And it showed me that how different the kids today are, and how the fact that they aren't going to college to open up their minds. What they want is they want to reaffirm what they think they already know. And I think that's hugely disheartening. What's the point of going to college if not opening your mind and hearing all points of view and learning how to critically think and explore ideas that might be distasteful to you, but to understand why they're distasteful? So I'm a big fan of his Dark Horse channel. He was on Joe Rogan last week, and it was a 3-hour conversation. I watched the whole thing. It was amazing. Orville Nation sends in a super chat and says, the entire Orville Nation loves Robservations. Well, the Robservations loves the Orville Nation too. Did you see that Bruce Broughton, the composer for the Orville, won an award, which was pretty great? Seth MacFarlane tweeted that out. I retweeted him today. Alexander Wilson is here and says, the Gula Geechee was portrayed Norman Jewison's A Soldier's Story. The character CJ was on and called on in the movie. Also, Sergeant Walters hated him because he was one. Also, I'm descended from the Gula Geechee people. Well, Alexander, I ask you, how would you feel about a young adult novel dealing with that subject that I talked about? I mean, I think it sounded fascinating, and I loved A Soldier's Story. I'm a huge Norman Jewison fan, but I didn't remember that. I haven't seen that movie in forever, and I've always liked it, and I probably 25 years I haven't seen it. I got to get that again. Malbrain sends in a super chat and says, gatekeeping is rife in the publishing industry now. Have you heard of sensitivity readers? There are more of them than actual authors these days. Oh my God. I mean, half the books I've read would never pass sensitivity readership. I don't understand it. I honestly don't understand it. I really don't get the kind of culture that we're living in. And who are we protecting? Like, we're protecting people when the reality of life hits them, when the indifferent universe rolls up and knocks on your front door to tell you, oh, they don't tell you, it just steamrollers your house. I mean, how are we creating a group of people that are going to be ready to face what the world has in store? It's unbelievable to me. I don't get it, man. Anonymous sends in a tip and says, forgive the self-plug, but I'm talking to writer-producer James Tucker about the DC Animated Universe films, Justice League Dark, on my YouTube channel and Facebook this Saturday night. Also, have you thoughts on the canceling of Warren Ellis and other comics sexually harassing pros? I would assume that this is John Suntress of the Word Balloon podcast. And if so, I would like to say John Suntress is a great friend of this channel, and I love his podcast. He has been crushing it with his interviews on Facebook. You can watch. Normally he was doing a podcast. Now he's doing video casts on the Facebook page. Always, it seems like he's doing them all the time. He's got some really fascinating guests on, so that's really cool. James Tucker about the DC Animated Universe films. Now, for those of you who have not been following what's been going on, Warren Ellis, somebody whose work I have a lot of here, was, as many people know, he was mentoring, girls, and maybe having inappropriate relationships here's I guess I have a different view of the world. I came from a different place. I had a very erotically charged youth. I had a lot of fun. And fan circles were not erotically charged. Let's put it that way. Like, you might have gone to a Society for Creative Anachronisms event and, had a little fun there, or gone to a Ren Fair after party, or many science fiction conventions, but it was always kind of weird. Now we live in a world where there's just as many women in the fan space as there are dudes, and I think that there is everywhere, there is a temptation for people that aren't men that are not used to hanging out with pretty girls, that or girls that are admiring or worshipful of them or their talent. It's a very intoxicating thing, and I think that like in all industries, like in the motion picture business, people are abusing their positions. But I also think that a lot of other people, because we live in a, I would say, less erotically charged environment, that there's a lot of people that are not as savvy about navigating these waters, especially in fan circles. And I think everybody needs to do better. Everybody needs to do better. And I think that these guys know better, and yet there's a lot of just nerdy dudes. Even I mean, remember, even your favorite best comic book author was probably a nerdy dude at one point who isn't as savvy as you might want him to be. I think it's bad. I think that this kind of abuse has to end across the board. You know, if you're in a position, a mentorship position of any kind, and it doesn't matter who you are, if you're in a position where, say, you're a guy, maybe an older guy, and you have a young woman that might attract you, you might be attracted to her because you have the same interests or because she's intelligent and she's blown you away with her intellect or whatever, I would say here's a pro tip. Resist the urge. What you want to do is you want to inspire the next generation. You want to hopefully push people on their way, be encouraging of them, and maybe not try and get into all their pants. Just as a pro tip, might want to not do that. Don't abuse your position. There are people out there that are really searching, and they really trust you. And if people like what you do, and they come to you as a fan and as an admirer, it is of paramount importance that you do not abuse that, because, you know, who knows what you're going to do to someone's life if you do, and who knows how they might be deprived of sharing the world of what could be their genius because you were a dick. You know, you might put them off the whole industry. They might never go into comic book art or comic book writing or anything they want to do, and that would be a damn shame. I'm not a fan of it, and we just have to do better, and you just have to be mindful of the people that, you know, people look up to you, and if they look up to you, those are the people that are most important. They should be the most important to you because your work has touched them. They're your audience. That's the worst thing to do to someone. I don't think there's anything a creator can do aside from creating shit. There's nothing worse than a creator can do than to break the trust of their fans or their audience. Not good. So it bums me out. Hapkido Locke is here and sends in a tip and said, couldn't possibly agree more with your opening point about the very real threats posed. Aside, you might be underrating your experience with Gula Ritz-Conrack with Voight? With Gula. I don't know that. Conrack. Voight. Oh. Ethan Holgate says, any thoughts on Last of Us Part 2 if you have any? I haven't played it yet. I know what everybody's up in arms about. I've been following the controversy. I get it, but I haven't played it yet. All I can tell you is I loved it. I love the first one. Alexander Wilson says, and I knew that Alexandra Duncan was white because no Gula Geechee would talk about that, would talk about like that or about that. Just from reading Alexandra, I can tell she didn't grow up in the culture or have friends that did. Well, that's absolutely on her. That's her. That's that, and she might not have captured the culture, and that I think is very valid. Lancelot Narian, then she didn't do her research then either. Lancelot Narian sends in a tip and says, I really like today's subject. I read the article earlier when you tweeted it, and I hadn't heard about the Gula. Now I have. You need to get both these authors on the show and talk this through. That would be must-see TV. Let's resolve division. I agree, and I'll tell you, man. I'm ordering Bethany's book, Mem. I think it's Mem. That book sounded really good. I mean, I'll flat out say it. I think she was wrong doing what she did. I understand why, though. I understand in this day and age. I understand where she was coming from. But I'll tell you one thing. her book. And you know what? Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll reach out to her for the 500th episode of Robservations. I wonder if she'd talk to me. I'll reach out to her, though. I've got to read Mem first. I have to have something. I have to be able to speak to her from a position of knowledge of her work. So, yeah. Claudius Black. Hello, Claudius. Counseling. Counselor Deanna Troy would report your support of International Women's Day to Captain Picard. Guinan would support your brand of feminism with a smirk. I don't know, man. What you'd really try and do is get them both together for a counseling session, if you know what I'm saying, right? No. But you know, you might be right about that. Guinan's a lot. She's been around for a while. She's seen it a lot. She's seen a lot. She's been married a lot too. You know, she's got. You know, Guinan's got skills. She's got skills. She has knowledge you would want to learn. Alexander Wilson goes on to say, as a black person who knows that we would never get the opportunities that Alexandra Duncan would get, I would not read her book about my ancestors, because just from reading her thoughts and excerpts, my people were just caricatures in her story. Well, Alexander, that's legit. I mean, and that's the thing. If you read the book and if that's the truth, then perhaps, and I'd like to think that maybe she goes back and starts doing the kinds of research, retool her book, and get people to help her make it much more authentic. And that's why you have technical advisors. I mean, if she read that or wrote that book without having that, well, then that's on her. And that's legitimate. And I would say that if you, and that's what you have readers for. That's why you would like, I would never write a book like that without sending it to people in that community and say, what do you think of this? How do you feel about it? You know, Tango Shalom, we showed to various religious leaders because we wanted to get their feedback. And some of it I didn't even consider. There were things I learned. I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. And it was helpful. Social etiquette, says Claudius. I think cool kids also understand how to say something, how to express disagreement, and constructively suggest change. Social etiquette is the difference between getting a slap in the face or jumping into bed. I agree with you. I think that that's very important. Anonymous comes on and says, Bethany Murrow didn't cancel anybody or anything. She just doesn't have that power. Only the author or publisher can do that. You just incited everyone to attack and cancel her. You just did what you hate, and you put her picture up too. Shame on you. I went to her website. Her picture's on her website. And I don't think anybody should cancel her. As a matter of fact, like I just said, I'm buying her book. But I do think that on Twitter, she went after one author, went after another author on Twitter. It was not done. And when you do something like that, the question that I have is, why are you doing that? By the way, I went to both women's websites, and they're there. You can go to their websites. And I read stuff from both of their websites. And as anybody could. And I'm not inciting anybody to cancel anyone. I wanted to know who people were talking about, so you knew. I don't think people should cancel Bethany. If anything, I think her book is good. And I'm supporting her because I'm going to go buy her book when this show is over. So I think, see, this is interesting, though. See, you know what? It was Bethany who chose to go on to Twitter and question another author's. I mean, you have to ask, why do that in public? You know, why do that in public? I thought I tried to give a fair and balanced account of what's going on. I don't think anybody should cancel them. I think people should go read their work and let it speak for themselves. You know? And I didn't incite anyone to attack anyone. Let me be clear. If anything, I think people should go read Bethany's book because it sounds good. I haven't... Alexandra's books are more YA fiction, whereas Bethany wrote that book, Mem, is not a YA book. So so I didn't do what I hate. I never wanted anybody to go, and if anybody feels that way, obviously you do, but then I stand corrected. But I hopefully I wasn't trying to incite anyone. And this is the thing, I don't hate her. I don't hate anybody. I'm bringing up a situation that occurred that was reported by Publishers Weekly today. And as I said, I knew nothing about either woman. I went to both of their websites, as anyone can do. Their pictures are right there for all to see. And so is information about their books and what they support. Bethany actually had an article that I was going to share that I opted not to. That you can go. I put the link in this live chat. But I want to be clear. If you feel that way, I'm sorry that you do. I don't think I did that at all. And if that was your impression, I apologize for doing that. But I think you're incorrect about what I was doing. Stubble McShave, I mean, she went on Twitter. She went after that author. She did that. It became a story. The book she pulled, and maybe she should have, based on, I would trust Alexander Wilson's assessment of what she wrote. But Bethany didn't say anything like that, so I have nothing to go by other than what was reported by Publishers Weekly. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, books and other types of art need to be provocative. That is what starts debate and discussion. It seems people don't want to have discussion. They want to have absolute truth. It can easily fall into absolutism and a form of totalitarianism. Oh, I think it has. I think it's absolutely falling into a form of totalitarianism because it comes down to the fact that what it is like, I got into a conversation on a Facebook page with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the idea of Song of the South, and eventually, like, we were having a conversation about it, but it gets to the point where nowadays, if you don't believe exactly what people want you to believe right away, there is no discussion. As a matter of fact, they already think they know something that you don't know. They think if you don't just agree with someone, that you must be against them. And I what do I say on the show all the time? You have to start thinking three-dimensionally, that these problems are real, legitimate problems that have to be considered carefully, and people really need to start thinking about what's going on. That's what this whole show is all about. This whole show is about all of us, the Post-Geek Singularity, coming together and sharing opinions. That's why I will read letters that you can send me letters about anything. I only ask that you be respectful of everyone else in the community. That's it. And what I've loved is there's been a lot more back and forth where people have been writing in saying, I did not like so-and-so's letter of this date. People are now saying in Robservations episode 251, this person said this, and then I read their letters. This is a place on the internet that I will do everything in my power. I will stop doing this show before I will stop the dialogue of people being able to talk to each other. So anyway, yes. So Stubble, the totalitarianism, it's weird. It's very, very odd. I mean, we saw it before. Like in the 80s, you had Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, starting the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, where they got warning labels slapped on records, man. They did not want to meet Darling Nikki in a hotel lobby masturbating with a magazine, whereas I've always wanted to find Darling Nikki. Tipper Gore never did. And there's a difference there. Now, Tipper Gore would say, I'm wrong. And I would say, Tipper, clearly, you need to lighten up, girl, because let me just say, Prince and I are having more fun in our lives than you are. But it was weird. I mean, it was really strange that they were slapping warning labels on things. I mean, it's bizarre. Mark C says, do we expect women to not be in control of their own actions? These women were not underage. Is what Ellis did really wrong? Were these not consenting adults? We can do better, but that door swings both ways. Look, there is no doubt that when you are a celebrity in whatever world in entertainment, there are always going to be people, both men and women, that throw themselves at you depending on who you are. That happens all the time. And I agree. I think right now there's been some really like that Justin Bieber hit and run thing, that what's been going on. I mean, he was accused, and of course he had all the evidence to back up and say, and now he's suing whomever for $20 million. And I think rightfully so, because nowadays anybody can throw any accusation. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about how that he and I were talking about. What if you cooked up your own allegations and you accused yourself via some kind of a proxy of some kind of hideous allegation as to prove what's going on? You know, and do it as a social media experiment. And what if you did that? You know, and watch how it could be done. Anybody can do it to you, or you could do it to yourself. I mean, I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon, but it's gotten to the point where social media is weaponized so quickly that you can do anything to anyone, and then the burden of proof is on you forever. You know, and it never goes away. And yet there are people that take glee, people that are your friends, people that know me, you know, calling me out or calling me. There were people I've never said a bad word to or an unkind word in my life, calling me a trash person. This happened to me a couple weeks ago. And it's like, I think the only reason that you can overcome something like that is if you have enough people that understand where you are really coming from. The people that came after me never watched this show. So but it's frustrating. It's especially when it's people that you work with. I mean, nowadays, there's people that just don't like you, and if that's the case, I mean, you know, if you're Dr. Evasian and you don't like me, and he doesn't like me either, then I'm sorry. I know you have the death sentence on 12 systems. I get it, but we can do better, and I do think it swings both ways. People have to take responsibility for themselves, and again, I mean, when you're an adult, if you want to engage in adult behavior, you have to understand when that adult behavior becomes a little too adult for your liking, you either walk away or don't engage in that adult behavior, but don't engage in some kind of adult behavior that you then later regret and then decide, I don't know, 6 years later that you're going to go after somebody. I mean, I know we live in that world. It's crazy. Alexander Wilson goes on to say, Bethany Morrow said that writer never reached out to her for her thoughts on the cancellation that Alexandra did. The whole article was designed to blame the other for the cancellation. Also, Bethany is getting a lot of hate in real life. I was anonymous. Oh. Well, I mean, look, I think the reason being is that she did it on Twitter. You know, she's obviously a very smart, very well-educated, probably a great writer, because I love her idea, that book from Mem. That's a great idea. I mean, clearly she has one of those, like, I love books that have if there's an interesting intellectual idea, a premise, and the premise gets me, that premise got me. And the question that I would ask is, what she knows what was going to happen. If you go on Twitter and you say those kinds of things, you know what's going to happen. You can't say you don't know. We live in a world where we've got years now of people on Twitter and our cancel culture. And if you have a problem, you want to reach out as a colleague. I mean, I would think that writers, especially female writers, that are both working in the YA space, that one could reach out to another and go, hey, you know, maybe you might want to think about this, or have you thought about this? Because I read the premise, and while, you know, I think this is a really interesting thing, I think her sentiment was correct. You know, she's dealing with an underrepresented people, people whose way of life is probably being diminished every year because there's less and less of them, yet a rich culture that should be preserved and talked about. Those are all valid opinions, but to go on Twitter and do it, you know what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen, and that was done for a very specific reason, to create a stir. To create a stir. And my question would be, perhaps if you don't want a backlash, or you don't want something to happen, don't go on Twitter and say something like that. That's my question. Why do it there? Why not reach out directly? Jason Bueno says, watch the 10-hour cinematic of The Last of Us 2. Gameplay's good too, though. Yeah, John Campea did that. He watched the whole thing. I want to play that game. I loved Last of Us. It was great. I was totally enamored of it. I was completely sucked in. But yeah, Alexander, I still keep thinking about I keep thinking about, like, you know, I try and use Twitter. I try and keep it keep it fun and light usually. The thing that people got mad at me about was a tweet that was specifically about Captain David Dorn. And when my words were taken out of that context, taken away from the actual video, because I wouldn't, they were definitely part of the same thing. When they were pulled out and retweeted, I'm like, that was done for a specific reason. And then everybody gets mad at me. I apologize for it because I looked unhinged. But if you don't have the video, I went and deleted the video that I put up because people said, you should delete this tweet. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I should. You're right. I looked a little unhinged. And then I did do that. And then the same people that asked me to delete my tweet then screen capped what I had said and then blew it out and said I was something that I'm not. That's a different thing. But yeah. Lancelot Narian says, today somebody tweeted a vile, evil message to Marina Sirtis. It included a reference to a recently deceased husband. I saw a red mist. I replied to him in my London vernacular. Now I'm suspended from Twitter. Yeah. Marina Sirtis is a delightful woman. When I was working on Star Trek, I spent many hours just talking with her when I was interviewing her. And her husband came by, and I just can't, when did we become that way? When did we lose our empathy for one another? Like, I honestly don't get it. I don't understand. Like, where did it go? Where did it go? I don't know. I got more letters though. And, this one's from Omar94. Hi, Rob. I know it's an actor's job to be someone they're not. However, I will say there are times when I see actors playing characters who are so different than what I'm used to that it makes me impressed. But it also takes me time to get used to it, since it's hard for me to think of them acting any other way. For example, whenever I think of Andy Griffith, the image that always comes to my mind is him as Sheriff Andy Taylor. But then when I saw him in A Face in the Crowd for the first time, it was a complete opposite. I was impressed by his performance, but it took me a while to get used to it since I'm so used to thinking of him being the way he was in the Andy Griffith Show. I don't know if others feel that way. Maybe it's just me. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, I was struck by that, Omar, when we watched Elephant Man on Whining About Movies, because Anthony Hopkins is in it, and he plays such a caring and such an empathetic doctor, and he's the direct opposite of somebody like Hannibal Lecter. And I think that's what makes that's what great acting is. It's you look at Jack Nicholson as R.P. McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and then you look at him in The Departed. I mean, and that's what great acting can do. I think there's nothing better than that. I love when that happens. I love it. I love when actors surprise you that way. Stephen H. is here. Stephen H. says, hey, Rob. You talk about how everyone has a story to tell. Well, to know me is to know my love for storytelling. It's why I'm a fan of movies, television, comics, music, video games, hell, even professional wrestling. The storytelling that can be done in a wrestling match is a thing of beauty to me. Example being WrestleMania 13 with Steve Austin versus Bret Hart. Austin walked in as a heel, a bad guy, and Hart as the face guy. By the end of the match, they had switched roles, and it was a star-making match for Stone Cold Steve Austin. The different forms of storytelling compel me and intrigue me on a regular basis. Sometimes I can be in the mood for a simple romantic comedy or perhaps a bloody revenge story. Themes involving dreams, such as Inception or Nightmare on Elm Street, or character studies on both a fictional and non-fictional level. There are so many things that can go into making a compelling story or even adding to it. Dating back to my childhood and playing Metroid on the original Nintendo with the 8-bit graphic settings and the simplistic but effective music set the tone. Now I'm 5 hours in playing The Last of Us 2. I've literally cried 3 times. Wow. The evolution of storytelling in games has been a thing of beauty, but I still get so much from going back and playing games from the 80s and 90s. Growing up on Batman and Spider-Man comics, it introduced me to death at such a young age. The summer of '89, during the hype of Tim Burton's Batman, I still remember sitting at a skating rink after playing the original Castlevania on an arcade game and eating a slice of pizza to read The Night Gwen Stacy Died and A Death in the Family. To see my 2 favorite heroes lose people closest to them, to me, is something that will forever stay with me. The story that superheroes can't save everybody and lose those closest to them. The ramifications and the feelings it left with me. Just the images told the story, but adding in the writing just added to the atmosphere that at age of 5, I know, a lot's taken at that age and probably too young to know such things. Perhaps that's why I've become a big fan of Zack Snyder and his DCEU films. The visual storytelling in Batman v Superman still gives me goose pimples. I've mentioned in my first 2 letters my love for Joss Whedon and his work, his writing style of dialogue and how he handles ensembles from the Scooby Gang in Buffy or the crew from Firefly. I knew something special could happen when Whedon was announced for the Avengers. Seeing Steve and Tony argue on the helicarrier was exactly what I imagined when I heard the news. Then there is music. Music can add to movies and television in helping tell a story, whether it's helping set a mood or set a tone. Yet not just in movies, but music in general can tell a story. Even DC's Dark Knight's Metal got a soundtrack. You know, I really like that. I like Dark Knight Metal. Just listening to 2 of my favorite musicians in Chino Moreno from the Deftones and Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains adds something Batman and DC related is the things that dreams for someone like me are made of. I'm just a sucker for all these things, and I guess it's helped lead me here. Seeing others and their passion and love for all things pop culture, that is just part of my story. I hope to tell more in the future, and I'm happy to see a place for others in their imagination, perspective, and opinions. Stephen H., Shivering Melody. Well, Stephen, I'm glad you feel that way. Thanks for being here. That's what this channel is all about. This next letter comes from Stubble McShave. Hi, Rob. Something that's characteristic for some visual media, especially the Star Wars movies, is the use of color in their clothing and the psychology of colors. In a visual medium, the colors have meaning, and you instinctively get certain emotions and associations from them. It's similar to music in movies and can be used in similar ways. It enforces a feeling about characters or a situation. If you look at Empire, for example, their clothes and armor are characterized by black, white, and red colors. The red color is associated with passion and aggression. It's connected to love, power, anger, and lust. The black color is connected to sophistication, grief, fear, and death. So when Vader ignites his lightsaber in the original Star Wars movie, you first get a sense of dread followed by a sense of power and aggression. Where does the white come in? The stormtroopers are mostly white with some black details. Well, you see, white has a few associations connected to it. White is connected to happiness, naivete, sincerity, purity, and sterility. So when you combine mostly white with some black details, you get minions with exude sterility and fear, a kind of faceless enemy. Leia in the original Star Wars have more or less just one outfit in the movie, and it's pure white, at least until they fall into the trash compactor. The pure white in this case indicates purity and sincerity. What about the Jedi? They usually have brown robes with off-white clothing underneath. Their lightsabers are usually green and blue. When you look at the brown color, it's associated with ruggedness, nature, warmth, seriousness, and reliability. The blue color is associated with intelligence, trust, serenity, duty, logic, and calm. The green color is associated with harmony, balance, friendliness, and creativity. This means that you get the following impressions of the Jedi from their color scheme. They are relatable and serious with a sense of duty, logic, and calmness. They exude a sense of intelligence and harmony. The off-white clothes the Jedi wear beneath their robes give a sense of simplicity and purity of the white, combined with the ruggedness, reliability, and warmth of the brown. The purple lightsaber Mace Windu uses breaks with Star Wars' effective use of the psychology of colors. Purple is associated with sophistication and majesty. It doesn't quite ring true for the Jedi ethos. Yeah, but you know what? I have to say, Sam Jackson, you know, he's a bad motherfucker. And he's a Prince fan, so he should be carrying a purple lightsaber. In the end, I'll end this with saying something about Luke's clothes in Return of the Jedi. He starts the first scene hidden under a cloak of dark mystery. It's soon revealed that he wears a black outfit. Subconsciously, this tells us that he's treading down a possible dark future filled with hate and fear. He starts out the movie by choking one of the guards. This tells us that he may already have started down a dangerous path. In the end, he's tempted by the dark side and almost gives in, but he pulls through, throws his lightsaber, and you all know the rest. After the conflict with the Emperor is resolved, at least until the last movie, we see how Luke is dragging Vader along the ground and later removes his helmet. Well, during that scene, the flap on the front of his costume is opened up, revealing the lining of his clothing is white. This symbolizes that on the inside, he's always had a sense of purity and simplicity. So, Rob, do you think they rely too heavily on the psychology of colors in Star Wars, which robs the audience of surprise and characters? Or do you think the psychology of colors helps in telling a great story with archetypal characters and good and evil? Well, yes, I think, look, any movie, color is hugely important. You know, the movie that we're going to talk about tonight on Whining About Movies, Never Let Me Go, the director, Mark Romanek, explains how almost every room in that whole movie, the color palette was muted and brought down, and the clothes they wear and all that. It's incredibly important. Very, very, very important. So, yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger comes on and says, "Dear Rob, I hope you're all good and well and your family is safe. I have a rather intriguing and interesting inquiry. A while ago, I asked you about the script of Dune in regards to the age rating. There's one thing which particularly sticks out to me. In the books, there is a spice orgy as Jessica takes the water of life. In the Lynch version, this was ignored, but it was shown in the sci-fi miniseries. Since the miniseries was more accurate to the books and Denis Villeneuve's vision is supposed to be as close to the source material as possible, I naturally assumed this aspect of the novel would be inside the actual movie and hence raise the age rating. Can you say anything about this?" No, I can't. But please only talk about it if you're comfortable. I don't want to ruin anything. If it's a bad question, just ignore it. There's also another thing. There's a lesser-known Medium article out there which basically compiles all the information on the Dune script from various sources, and you, Rob, are one of them. What do you think about the validity of these claims? I read this article, and I think that they're all pretty good. Tell me what you think of the article, but only if you have time. Again, please only answer the question. If you can only read the article, if you would like to, I did read the article. You know what? I'll put this article in the live chat. There you go. Yeah, I don't want to, that would get into that. I don't want to say anything more about that kind of stuff, because that's a specific question. Jeffrey Mao has written quite a bit, and he says, "Greetings, Rob, Robservationists, Post-Geeks, Imagination Connoisseurs, and all others. I picked up a few discs from the Disney Movie Club to satisfy my VIP requirement. I got Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor, which I was surprised to discover that I had never bought on Blu-ray, and Iron Man 2, which I also never owned. My copies of Kino Lorber's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly arrived yesterday, and also the 4K of Leon the Professional. I neglected to mention that I also did get Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 4K. The prices for when it first came out were kind of high, so I waited until the price went down. I'm definitely eager to see a Pulp Fiction 4K. I hope it comes out. I've held off getting the Blu-ray for that reason. Maybe have it boxed with Reservoir Dogs. While watching 1917 this morning, I ran into a problem I also had with Jaws. It literally just stopped playing and froze. Jaws froze right when Quint was firing the dart. I had to stop the disc, and then when it played again, the disc started to hang right where the Universal logo starts up. This was for 1917. One time earlier in the film, for a frame or two, the screen was half in blue, but thankfully that didn't last. Always annoying when your physical media starts having a problem. So far, I've been lucky with not having bad discs. I remember my Life of Pi Blu-ray was glitchy. One of the first DVDs I got was the Bruce Lee collection, and on one disc the image pixelated a lot. I assumed it was just an early DVD. Omar's letter about the rapidity of romances in film and his mentioning of the Disney films got me thinking. I have some thoughts on the Disney princess stories from reading them to my own daughter from a box set. Many of the stories are set during the happily ever after phase, like after Ariel, Cinderella, Aurora, and Jasmine start their life with their mates. Now the Belle story appeared to take place during the period when Belle was an unwilling guest of the Beasts and she was still getting to know him. However, the rest are set after the princesses get married. What's interesting is that the Aladdin Jasmine story is more entertaining because Aladdin is the main character and he gets to participate in the story, whereas with the other princesses, there usually needs to be some kind of excuse to not have the prince be involved because he's kind of dull. Honestly. I suppose this is the reason why most romances work during the courtship phase and not during the after phase. While Omar is correct that most film romances seem to happen way too fast, the flip side is that the TV series with the romantic theme tend to take way too long. Many series that involve around the will they, won't they question naturally wants to string the viewer out as long as painfully possible. Take Bones, for example. No way they would take that long to do it or not do it. In reality, it would have happened sooner. Now, I can understand the showrunner's desire to keep it going because story-wise, everything stops working once you actually finalize the status of the main character's working relationship. Keeping open the possibility keeps the viewer watching. While this formula worked very well for decades during the broadcast TV era, I don't see any of the current big shows that are on streaming or cable as having that model. With the serialized format and shorter episode counts, there's no way that showrunners can have the luxury to draw out a relationship over 5+ seasons of 20+ episodes a season. That's all for now. Let's see what you guys are saying here. Where am I? I don't even know where I'm. Oh, I am over here. Alexander Wilson says, yes, RMB, you did just cancel and mob culture on Bethany, who brought up a reasonable point about my culture. You invited people to attack her, even if that wasn't your intention, but it's going to happen. That was totally ridiculous. I disagree with you. I think that she went out on Twitter, and she, once you go out on Twitter and you say something like that publicly in a public forum on Twitter, you've opened your own floodgates. And I'm responding to an article that was published by Publishers Weekly. Both Alexandra and Bethany have their own websites. You can go there. You can see their points of view. And I have never called for anybody to go after Bethany at all. At all. As a matter of fact, like I said, I want to read her book. I do think it's wrong what she did. I think it's wrong. But that doesn't mean people should swarm her. I don't agree with that. And you know what? The idea, if you go onto a public forum like Twitter and you attack a fellow author, and she did, come on, you have to recognize she could have written to Alexandra directly at her website, but she chose to go onto Twitter. She chose to go onto Twitter to start static. I mean, she did. And I'm saying here, I'm responding to this Publishers Weekly article. I don't think anybody should go after her. You know, I think people should buy her book. That's what I would do. I mean, buy Mem. I think Mem sounds good. But you know what? When you go on Twitter and you go after a fellow author like that, I mean, maybe she could have. I think that was not the right thing to do. And I don't think you can have it both ways. If you go onto Twitter and you call somebody out in a public forum, you've called them out, and then you have to deal with the consequences. I don't believe in piling on to somebody. And, you know, it's interesting. It's not my intention what's going to happen. No, let me be clear. I think I've been very clear on this show. I wanted to show both sides of this argument. I'm not for or against anybody writing books. I think people should be able to write about whatever they want. You know, you let your readership and you let other people decide, the critics, whatever. I'm not a literary critic, although I've written literary criticism. It's not something I normally do. But you know, I don't think that once you've decided to go into the public forum and make your feelings known, you have to accept the responsibility that comes along with doing that. You have to. Otherwise, don't do it in the first place. And let's remember, if you're an author, and I've met many authors on Twitter, I have started relationships with many authors because I've randomly started tweeting about authors that I don't even know. I'll say so-and-so, I just read so-and-so's book. I've had authors contact me on Twitter and then send me galleys of their upcoming books because they know I like their work. Now, authors are keenly aware of the uses of Twitter. Keenly aware of it. I see it all the time. A lot of the authors that I know and love and follow are on Twitter. It is a useful forum to promote your own work. And it is a useful forum. Everybody's very, very, very aware of how to use Twitter. Nobody is using, especially if you're highly educated and you've got a social media presence and you have a website and you're selling your work and you're writing articles. You know, you go out there and you put yourself out. I mean, it happened to me. I make one tweet, people came after me. They came after me hard. People said a lot of shit about me, and I made one tweet about a man, a 78-year-old police captain who was murdered on the side of a road, or on a sidewalk in front of a pawn shop, and people came after me because I'm like, where were the people that, you want outrage? This was outrageous. I kept thinking about my grandfather. I was like, he was the grandfather. He had 10 grandkids. So I think if you go on Twitter and you say things, you're aware of what's going to happen to you if you go on Twitter. And if you're going to say something, if you're going to call someone else out, especially, you have to be willing to accept the consequences. You have to be willing, especially if you're writing work that's in the public domain, in the public sphere. You know, you're out on Twitter and you're talking. I don't believe that anybody should be piled on. I think what Bethany did, I'm calling her first name, as if I know her. I think what she did was actually very legitimate. And the questions she asked were questions to ask, but not necessarily in a public forum. That's not for me to say. That's her reality is her reality. But the question is begged, why do that? Why not write to somebody personally? So I don't think I didn't cancel or bring mob culture on Bethany. I cannot stress it enough. I think people should buy her book. I know I'm buying her book. So, and I need a new book because I just finished the end of October, Lawrence Wright's new book. So I'll buy her book and read it. But I think that you can't, if you're going to, you can't have it both ways. You can't play on social media and then not accept the consequences of what you're doing. So, it's bit me in the ass a number of times. Stubble says, soon people will go after One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest because the actors didn't have psychological conditions that they were portraying. I wonder what the set would be like if the actors had psychological conditions similar to those in the movie. I mean, yeah, it's all of this discussion is just, I don't understand when you're doing something that's inherently make-believe, why make-believe had to suddenly become like, you can't culturally appropriate, you can't depict people, abled people shouldn't be portraying disabled people. I just don't get it. I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. But we live in a strange time. We do live in a strange time. This last one is another Jeffrey Mal letter, and I'm going to end on this because it's long. Dear Rob and all the members of the Post-Geek Singularity, this is a letter I've been meaning to write for a long time, and I just keep forgetting about or other topics come up, but I feel the need to write it down. Okay, that totally did not rhyme. That subject is the serialized narrative method in the majority of popular series from the past 2 decades of television on all platforms, but primarily cable and streaming. Almost all of the most acclaimed series have had a serialized format, be it The Sopranos, The Wire, Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, The Shield, Sons of Anarchy, and the list goes on and on. However, for the first 4 to 5 decades of narrative television shows, this was not the case, the only exception being the soap opera. However, it is its own category for the reasons I'll explain later. The model for almost all television series was to produce 7 seasons of episodes amounting to approximately 25 per season. Then, after the conclusion of the series, which hopefully allowed for the production of at least 100 episodes, approximately 4 seasons, the series would be sold in syndication, allowing for the series to be shown again and also around the world. The reason for 100 is that the rights owner of the series could make a lot more money in the sale. According to Wikipedia, 100 episodes allows for 20 weeks of airing a series in strip or daily syndication before having to repeat an episode. Whatever the reason, when a series is aired in syndication, the broadcaster can air the episodes in any order it wants, regardless of the original release or production order. Also, viewers would not necessarily watch every day, and even when a show is in its original run, viewers would not always watch each episode every week, especially in the days before VCRs. This necessarily influenced the strategy of the networks, the series producers, and writers as to how to structure the series narratively. They settled on the episodic format, with every episode being its own self-contained story with no connection to the prior or subsequent episodes. Changes to the overall story would usually occur season to season, such as the arrival of a new cast member. The exceptions would be perhaps a 2-part special episode, at most twice a season. Also, because television seasons ran traditionally fall to spring, most series ran more or less synchronistically with the real time. That is, around Christmas time, there would be a Christmas episode. The actual production of the season ran similarly, with the start of production taking place in the summer, so that they were always several weeks ahead of broadcast. So, for example, episode 15 might be in production while episode 10 is airing. However, by the beginning of the 1990s, and certainly by the end of the decade, trends changed and much of television changed as well, with the move to serialized storytelling. Whereas previously serialized stories were only reserved for daily soap operas and the weekly nighttime counterparts, networks, studios, and writers began producing more and more shows to satisfy the growing demand. The popularity of cable networks, both basic and premium, allowed for increased budgets. Talent who previously only worked in films now turned their attention to TV. Film-level budgets and film-level storytelling started to shrink, and the episode counts of the seasons. Thus, stories needed to be told over the course of the entire season, not wrapped up neatly in one 44-minute episode. Also, because of the increased popularity of cable networks, there was the decreased need to keep the traditional 1-hour episode length, nor write the episode out in distinct acts to account for commercial breaks that became less and less needed, especially on pay cable. A show like 24 at its very core demanded a serialized storytelling structure. 24 in its later seasons, as it grew in popularity, would be aired consecutively with no breaks, as was traditionally the case. Television traditions also started to die out, for example, the fall to spring season or the annual season. Some shows would skip a year, for example, if needed, or a season would be split up in one calendar year. The biggest change to television series, though, has been with the advent of the streaming services, with most streaming series now all being produced and finished before release, and then all episodes being released at once. It changes completely how the viewer watches the season, as well as how the season's written out. With the idea of an episode having less and less meaning narratively and more an arbitrary division, the overall season is viewed as the actual narrative entity. No one now really remembers specific episodes of, say, Stranger Things. The other disadvantage of needing to complete the entire season at once is that there's no ability to make changes in mid-season based on ratings and viewer feedback. The season's pretty much set, and changes now occur season to season. In fact, even calling it a season now for a streaming series doesn't even make sense, but semantically we're kind of stuck with the word. A lot of talk about the serialized versus episodic format has come in the discussions concerning Star Trek Picard, contrasting it with the older Star Trek series that were mostly all episodic. There's clearly some pros and cons with both formats. I don't think that any series will ever go back to being purely episodic. If you want something episodic, it will more likely be an anthology show like Black Mirror. With the old approach, the producers had to deliver X number of episodes a season, so you would have filler, some bottle episodes, there would always be a stinker or two or more, but with no mandated episode count, the story of Picard Season 1 could have been told in 6 or 8 episodes. However, now I think audiences are used to the more sophisticated and modern approach of the serialized format, yet there could be room for a bit of a hybrid. We have no word of how the new Star Trek Strange New World show will run format-wise, but I would like to see it run in hybrid serial episodic format, kind of like the Season 4 Enterprise episodes or approach. So this is how it would work. You'd have a few subplots and run throughout the whole season. They might take 3 or 4 episodes to resolve, maybe more. Again, it's also based on how many episodes each season will have, but let's say it's 12. You could break the season up into 3 or 4 mini seasons or arcs if you use the wise guy term. Each episode will have the main story, which is the mission, but the arc continues alongside it. Each episode ends with a brief mention of where the ship is going next, and that's the next episode's mission. At the beginning of each episode, the crew might briefly mention the previous episode's mission or refer to missions from a few episodes ago. The goal would not be to dwell on it, but that the characters are aware of what happened and that it has an effect on them. For example, if the original Star Trek was done this way, the episode following Amok Time might have Kirk still being a little uneasy around Spock, and Spock would mention how he is over it, or as a logical being, he cannot harbor ill will towards Kirk. It would be like normal conversation that any two officers who consider themselves friends would have if they just had the deathmatch fight a few days before. Sure, they are the utmost professionals and would forget about it, but you're talking about Spock not going through with his wedding to T'Pring. Not exactly something that you just forget about, you know? So in this way, we can have connective tissue throughout the season, but not have each episode necessarily take place immediately after the previous one. It allows for casual continuity, but a few days or even a couple weeks pass between episodes. It's not a big deal. It works for a Star Trek type show where they're regularly going from one planet to the next, but it would also help address the occasional rush story, such as Troy falling in love with Devanani Ral in one episode. I'd like to see these stories happen over 3 or 4 episodes, and if 3 months pass, then it's more believable. You balance this out with a more considered 3-episode arc that's more like your traditional 2-parter, and in the end, your season still covers about a year's worth of time, maybe more, maybe less. This leads me to my last point about the serialized format and one of its bigger cons, in my opinion. One of my favorite series used to be Sons of Anarchy. If memory serves, Season 3 starts almost immediately after the end of Season 2. The Sons are dealing with having fought off the Henry Rollins-led white supremacist gang, an aggressive ATF investigation, and problems with their IRA connections. Jax's son gets kidnapped to Belfast, and the club goes to get him back and comes back home to deal with the ATF investigation. This whole season appears to take place in the span of a couple of weeks at most, so chronologically it seems that Season 2 and 3 happen in about a couple of months. The show fell into a pattern where each episode appears to take place only over a day. Given that Jax's son was only just born in Season 1, then at the end of Season 3, which is 2 years after the start of Season 1 for us, we've only spent maybe 6 months in the story. So what to do? The answer is that at the end of season 3, most of the club take the fall and go off to prison for about a year and a half. This allows the series to catch up with real time. Not that it was necessary to do so, but if you're talking about a show that runs 7 to 8 seasons and you've only covered 2 years in the story, then it gets a little unwieldy with the characters' ages, and especially if these are children. Jax's son was recast so many times I can't remember, and he also managed to have another child with Maggie Sif, the Maggie Sif character. I do feel that this is a flaw of the serial format and that there's no build-up in any way to advance time during the season. With an original series, there's always a time jump forward like what we see in Sons of Anarchy. However, with something like Game of Thrones, the show ran 8 seasons, but was probably in production for closer to 10. However, in the book series upon which the show is based, A Song of Ice and Fire is less than 3 years past. The Americans also utilize a time jump of about 7 months, if I recall, during one of the later seasons, when our sleeper spy couple, Philip and Elizabeth, request to become less active and spend more time with their kids and grow their business. Well, I've gone on long enough, and I haven't said anything that I want to say about the serialized TV format, but since I fear I've put people to sleep with this letter, I will save it for another one. Jeffrey Mao. Thanks for that, Jeffrey. Let's see. Claudius Kilgore says, I love the smell of Robservations in the evening. One time we worked a 12-hour shift, and when it was over, I opened YouTube. I finally saw a new one, a new Robservations. You know that smell of Lucky Tiger and wine? My phone smelled like verisimilitude. Alexander Wilson says, questioning somebody is attacking now, especially about my culture, when that author didn't do her research. Nobody cared about this until Publishers Weekly published the article, which tried to paint Bethany for the cancellation. That's the real villain. I don't know, though, Alexander. I think that, I don't know if that's true. Because you can't say, like, I didn't see it as a cultural thing at all. What I saw it as is, to me, it was one author going after another author in a public forum. And I thought, two people that are probably allies based on what's on Alexandra's website. And that's what I saw. And I think that I think now, especially when you're doing this over, there is a reason you have to ask yourself, why are you going after somebody on Twitter in a public forum, especially an author that has a fan base? You know, if you're going after a fan base, because that's what, when you're going after an author, you're going after all of that author's fans. And if you're doing it on Twitter, that's the place that fans can follow an author, and it's the most easily accessible place for you to interact. If you're a fan of an author and they're on Twitter, you might not ever get a response, but you can talk to that author directly and get a response. Sometimes in my case, I've had books sent to me for free. Now, when I talk about authors' books on Twitter, I'm not doing it with any expectation. It's just Twitter's Twitter. I'm always talking about, you should get this, you should get that. Look what I got. I love this, get that, you know. So I think you can't say that questioning somebody is attacking, because it's not. Questioning is questioning. You can't. And then when you say especially about my culture, well, I wasn't aware of that culture. I didn't know that it was in a soldier's story. I didn't know that. Now it makes me want to go back and watch A Soldier's Story again. But I think that look, we have to curtail the impulse that discussion is attacking, that dissension is bad. We have to have cogent, thoughtful, open conversation with people. We have to. And if you are going to, look, if you're going to go after somebody on Twitter, and Bethany went after Alexandra, and I'm like, as I said, I didn't know who either one of them were until I read that Publishers Weekly article today. And I think at the end of the day, remember, here was a woman, and by the way, I don't think Alexandra handled it well either. I thought she capitulated. I think she should have just said, listen, if that's the way you feel, perhaps you could read my book and give me feedback. If I was her, that's how I would have answered. I think she kind of was spineless and sniveling and should have stood up for her own work and she could have said that. She says, well, listen, I hear you, and if that's the way you feel, perhaps you could read my book and comment. please offer me feedback. And if there's any way that I could change the story and make it more along the lines of what you think it needs, because I respect your work as a creator, let's talk about that. I mean, that's how I would have handled it. And that way, the onus is on somebody said something that might very well be, as you're pointing out, Alexander could have been somebody who was, in fact, insensitive. She probably, absolutely was. I don't think she meant it. I mean, I don't think she set out a cursory glance at her website and looking at the sites that she supports and that she has links to on her own website would show that I think she's probably an ally of Bethany. They probably are good friends. They could be good friends. I think it still comes down to, it comes down to how it's handled and the way it's handled. And I think the way it's handled is have some discourse, have that open discourse. And, if Bethany says that, then she hopefully would be open. If Alexander said, well, you could be right. Would you read my manuscript and tell me what you think? I mean, that could have been the end of it right there. Because that's what I would have done. I'm like, and people if called me out and said, yeah, I don't know about this Tango Shalom movie. I don't know how you're approaching it. I would be like, all right, well, why don't you take a look at it and tell me what you think? Give me some feedback. I mean, we've done that. We actually show the movie to people and ask for feedback. We've done that with religious leaders as well. Please take a look at this. We want to make sure that everybody is that we get feedback and if there's things that we can change. There was a couple things actually that we changed because of that. So Claudius Kilgore says, one day, Rob, this culture war is going to end. Is it? I don't know. I don't know if it'll end. Mark C says tomorrow night, Art, 10 p.m. Central Time, or 8 p.m. Central Time, the Baton Rouge podcast Clobberin' Times will have a second episode on YouTube, and I will be the guest, assuming we have no connection issues. So if you find my ramblings amusing, please tune in. So that's 8 p.m. Central Time. Is that 6 p.m. my time? Baton Rouge podcast traveling, Clobberin' Times. It's Clobberin' Times. That's interesting. I would listen to that. I love everybody from Louisiana. Yes, Mukbang says... He sends in a super chat and says, general support, but Alexander is generally right this time. Okay, well, Alexander, now you have somebody else. A long time you have. Now there are two imagination connoisseurs that are saying that I have called out someone. So I have to sit back and I have to consider that and say, okay, that could very well be. But I would have to say then that that's certainly not what I was trying to do. I was trying to cover a story and I wanted to cover it from both sides of the equation. My question to you, what do you mean, Mukbang? What do you mean that Alexander is generally right? He's not right. He's kind of right. Generally right. Yeah, I mean, look, and both of you have, that's why you can share your opinion. That's why I think it's fun. Anonymous says, I know you're not Christian, but for the cancel culture, people who want to shoot everyone down, please read them Matthew chapter 8, verse 7. I think they need to hear it. Okay, I will. Hang on. All right. Let's see here. Wait, I got to scan. Let's open this up. This is my new open Bible, the New King James Version, my study edition, and it is got my name printed there. And I got this from Penelope Foster in 1990. Presented to Robert Burnett on the second day of November 1990. My prayers for you, 1 Corinthians 13. My hope for you, John 3:3. My belief in you, Philippians 12:6. In friendship, Penelope Foster. Now, let's see. I've got to find... I have to... Now, wait, what am I looking up here? Uh, wait, where am I? Matthew chapter 8, verse 7. You'll have to. I'm not. My favorite, Job. Daniel, my brother. Chapter 8. Oh, man. It's hard to. Chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, verse 7. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. That is Matthew chapter 8, verse 7. So you say, I know you're not Christian, but for the cancel culture who want to shoot everyone down, please read the Matthew chapter 8, verse 7. I think they need to hear it. So Jesus will come. And actually, I should probably say, now when Jesus is at, now, well, you said chapter 8, verse 7, and Jesus said unto him, I will come and heal him. Yeah, but will he? But I thank you for that. It's always a good thing to go pick up I love this, by the way. This, I am a firm believer in, if you get a Bible, this Bible is pretty great. It has the Old and New Testaments in it, and it's great because it's a study Bible, so it has maps and illustrations. It's got historical. It's great. So there you go. That's a first. I've never went and got my Bible and read it. But so there you go. Alexander goes and says, I see people in the chat are mad about what I'm saying. Well, they shouldn't be. Will the real people please stand up? Rob, you said way worse about Kurtzman than what Bethany said. She didn't have the power to cancel anything. She was pointing out some major concerns. Yes, but she was doing it on Twitter. And that, I would say that in itself, there is something that's happening there. But people shouldn't be mad in the chat. Don't be mad. Don't be mad in the chat. Joseph says, oh, hi, Rob. They can still make a Nightmare on Elm Street sequel a la Halloween route, ignoring stupid sequels with Heather Langenkamp and, of course, Robert Englund. That dude can play Freddy forever, if you ask me. I agree. Well, Alexander, I want to get back to that. I mean, I don't think people should be mad at you. You're a longtime founding member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. And you're a vibrant member. You always have a lot to say. And I, for one, as Kirk said to Commodore Matt Decker in the Doomsday Machine, I'd hate to lose you, We're stronger with you than without you. So I think the whole point is that you can come here and say whatever you want. That's why we have this community. And I don't think people should be mad at Alexander for speaking his mind. That's what this community is about. And we're supposed to be contemplative and think about what he's saying. I think that's what we do here. But anyway, on that note, I'm going to bring an end to Robservations, episode number 453. An interesting episode, to be sure. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Greg Smith. I want to thank, of course, the Richard. I want to thank Jody Lyons. I want to thank Haynock for being here. But I also especially want to thank the Richard for doing all that he does for the Post-Geek Singularity community over on the Facebook page and on the Whining About Movies page. So check it out. Tonight, now we're still debating this, but I think we were going to do 2 movies tonight on Whining About Movies. I think we're going to do one tonight and one tomorrow because, doing 2 shows in a row and drinking 2 bottles of wine, I have a lot to say about both movies, so I think that we're going to break it up. So tonight at 7 o'clock, join us for Never Let Me Go, which is, I think, one of the great science fiction films of the last 20 years, even though that is not an opinion that is shared by all, certainly. Mark Romanek, who only directed one other movie, 1 Hour Photo, and he has not directed a film since then. It came out in 2010. And I encourage everyone to join us at 7 o'clock tonight, Pacific Daylight Time, for Never Let Me Go. I want to thank everybody for sending me letters. Keep those letters coming. If you'd like to write letters to the show, Mukbang says it's pronounced Gula, not Gula. Oh, Gula, not Gula. Gula. No, okay. That's good, because it was the first time I've ever really heard of that. So thank you for that. And so, wait, where was I? Oh, yes. So if you want to send me letters, send them to me at the Burnettwork.net website. And as I said, as long as you're mindful of being respectful to the community, and if you disagree with me, if you agree with me, you send in letters, I will read them. And if you want to send me videos, as people know, you can send me videos. I will play them on this show. And if, like Alexander, you think I'm wrong, tell me why. I will read it. And let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Anonymous says, I wrote the verse wrong. The scripture was, he who is without sin cast the first stone. You know, I kind of thought that. I can't help it. I could only read what you gave me. So I apologize. He who is without sin cast the first stone. Well, that's the problem with cancel culture now. Is people need to be very careful. Yes, but I just want to thank you. I never got my Bible out and read it. By the way, I always have my books alphabetized under the author's name. This is under G. It's under G. Just saying. So there you go. But Anonymous, thank you for that. So anyway, this brings an end to Robservations episode number 453. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, join us at 7 o'clock for Never Let Me Go for Whining About Movies, episode number 44. I think 44. 44? And we'll talk about it. One of my favorite science fiction films. Man, what a devastating movie. I love it. So we'll see you tonight at 7. And as always, I'll be back tomorrow. But as always, have a better day.